The Japanese Grand Prix of 2014 is a recent entry in this long line of motorsport history videos, the race that resulted in the tragic death of Formula 1 up-and-comer Jules Bianchi, which is the most recent fatality in Formula 1. And the Japanese Grand Prix as a whole is no stranger to downpours, given its usual late placement in the season, where it has been since it first appeared on the calendar in 1976, although events called the Japanese Grand Prix started as a sports car race back in the early 1960s. The first event in 1976 was a washout, Niki Lauda sacrificing his championship against James Hunt to preserve his own life. 2007 at Fuji, also held in horrible conditions, the qualifying session for the 2004 race being held on the Sunday due to Typhoon Ma-on, the 2010 race that was disrupted by rain, and there was last year in 2022 when the race ended in a pretty confusing manner. But on top of that, the Japanese Grand Prix has also paid host to races that have defined championships, either because that's where the title was settled or just otherwise had something happen that stands out. 1989 and 1990 are the two obvious examples where title was settled and also had something immediately stand out, and obviously 2014 when Bianchi had his accident, and the subject of today's video, the 1994 race, the race of two halves. Sort of. 1994 is a season that gets a lot of airtime on this channel because it's just, well, it's interesting. All the stuff that happened. Maybe a film could be made about it one day, featuring Ian McDiarmid as Bernie Ecclestone or something. But the whole Option 13 thing, Senna's claims of the traction control, and was it traction control or just a blown diffuser, Plankgate, the overtaking on the formation lap, Jos Verstappen being set on fire, and the ending in Adelaide that looks less and less deliberate every time I see it. But because of all of this, the championship was artificially made close. Schumacher on 86 points while Damon was on 81, but the gap would have been even bigger if not for the formation lap kerfuffle and the Plankgate incident that happened at Spa, which is probably a video for another day because I've never looked into it. There's probably more than meets the eye with that. And since we're on the subject of 1994, I'd just like to interrupt the proceedings of this video to do a little market research. Don't worry, it's not an ad, it's not a sponsor, it's something you might actually be interested in. I'm thinking of doing a 100% 1994 season in Grand Prix 4 using the AI to race, but with Senna present for the whole season. Just as a bit of fun, what if type of thing. Stream it, have a hangout, see what happens, maybe take it into 1995 as well. Just want to see if that's something that people would want to watch. Anyway, back to the video. This was also the race where Johnny Herbert became, I believe, the only man to drive for 3 teams in 3 consecutive races. At this round, he was driving for Benetton. At the previous race at Jerez, he was driving for Ligier, and the race prior to that, he was driving for Lotus. How did that happen? Well, Lotus was on the edge of going bust and had called in the administrators, much like Force India did a few years ago at Sergio Perez's request, and typically when you hear about administration, it involves some lower league football club that the owners have either rinsed dry through being blood-sucking leeches, or because they've overspent trying to get back into the Premier League, knowing that TV money and prize money will wipe off what they've spent. So when the administrators came in for Lotus, Tom Walkinshaw and Flavio Briatore, who were in with the Ligier team at the time, bought Johnny's contract off Lotus and were then able to put him in a Ligier and then farm him out to Benetton. Again, Walkinshaw, Briatore, all the pies they had fingers in, there's probably a good 10 minutes worth of material there just on its own. But the whole merry-go-round of drivers is something I've covered at length before, so I won't bore you with recapping the whole thing. But I do like to do these sorts of bits because I like to assume that everybody that watches a video is brand new. Plus it's a good reminder for people that have watched previous videos that might have forgotten because we all have busy lives. But what I will mention is that 2 of the drivers involved in this merry-go-round, Mika Salo and Taki Inui, were in the race because of existing connections to Japan. Mika Salo was racing in Japanese Formula 3000 at the time, and Taki Inui is a Japanese driver that brought a lot of yen to the struggling Simtek team that had been rocked by the death of Roland Ratzenberger earlier that season. So a local driver and a driver already racing in Japan. Good little commercial deal. As far as the points went and how performances in the previous round in Jerez went, Schumacher needed to win with Hill lower than second to take the title with a race to spare. Hill had to beat Schumacher to keep the title hopes alive, and had to pull something out of the bag after Schumacher had absolutely destroyed everybody at Jerez, beating Hill by 24 seconds, Hakkinen over a minute behind, and only the top 4 on the lead lap. Which seems unfathomable by today's standards, but with the way Formula 1 worked back then, it was pretty common. Reliability with the cars was a bit iffy, and if some of the slower cars made it to the end, they'd be 3 to 4 seconds a lap slower than the faster guys. Schumacher drew first blood in qualifying, with the Friday qualifying session times taken because it was absolutely lashing down on Saturday. So his time on Friday for 1:37.2 was enough, just over 4/10 faster than Hills Williams and Frentzen doing well in the Sauber to be third. Gasho and Belmondo in the Pacifics didn't qualify, as there were 28 cars going for 26 slots on the grid. No 107% rule in effect until the start of 1996, and no pre-qualifying, as there had to be more than 30 cars for that to happen, which hadn't been the case since 1992. Hill was not only struggling with the Michael, but struggling within the team. Mansell was back in the car to replace Coulthard so Williams could wrap up the championship on the constructors' side, but with that came some politics. Damon wrote in his autobiography, "Williams couldn't have done a better job of making me feel like an understudy to Nigel if they tried. They hung on his every word while he told them exactly what I had been saying all year about the improvements we needed to make to the car. Patrick said to me after qualifying, 'You walk around with a long face, you're glum, you're never happy, it affects the team. From now on, I would be out for myself. This was my car, my track, my race. I'll do what I like.'" It's one of the few times that Damon did get the claws out. He started the race behind Michael and stayed behind Michael and was able to keep up with him for the most part. Meanwhile, behind them, it was carnage, as Lagorce in the Ligier, the two Minardis and the three Japanese drivers were out, with Katayama and Noda being injured in their crashes. They were followed by Hub on lap 4, who aquaplaned straight off. Lato's Sauber had blown up on the start line and Berger's battery fried on lap 11. Damon continued in his book, "I hung on, and for the first dozen laps I witnessed the most incredible driving display I've ever seen in a racing car. I lost count of the number of times Michael went off the road and never lost a beat." He also said that if he stopped seeing the red light on the back of the Benetton, that would be race over for him, as Michael would surely pull away. Damon also, in an interview with Clive James, described driving an F1 car in the wet as like driving behind a lorry on the motorway without wipers on. You can't see a thing. 2 laps after Berger retired, the footwork of Gianni Morbidelli went off at Dunlop and crashed. If that corner sounds familiar, it should. If you're not familiar with the name Footwork, it was just the Arrows team due to a sponsorship agreement with a Japanese logistics company between 1991 and 1996. You'd think with a name like Footwork it would be some sort of shoe company, but nope, logistics. So I've learned something new today. Footwork logos were gone by the end of the 1993 season, but the team was still called Footwork because the owner of Footwork Logistics, Wataru Ohashi, was still a shareholder. And then all of this ended when Jackie Oliver sold the team to Tom Walkinshaw in 1996. Anyway, Morbidelli had gone off at Dunlop and was in the process of being recovered by a multi-ton telehandler type machine. Is that starting to sound even more familiar? Soon after, either that same lap or the next lap, again sounding mighty familiar, Martin Brundle's McLaren left the road in exactly the same spot that Morbidelli had gone off. Brundle was heading shoulder on towards this telehandler that was recovering the footwork, and in the moments between leaving the track and coming to a stop, his thoughts were most definitely leaning towards the fact that he was going to go underneath that telehandler, tractor, digger, whatever it was. Really is sounding familiar, isn't it? Somehow, Brundle's path across the gravel took him away from the recovery vehicle and he crossed in front of it, missing it by what he claims was around 50 centimetres. Instead of smashing into the recovery vehicle, he hit the tyre wall. And a marshal. The marshal was flung forwards in towards Brundle's cockpit and came face to face with the 1990 Le Mans winner, to the point where Brundle was able to see the pain and horror on the guy's face. The marshal's leg was badly broken, to the point where bone was actually coming out of the overalls. Not a pretty sight. Afterwards, Brundle was reprimanded by the FIA for saying to them, "Why the hell was this recovery vehicle in that gravel trap in those conditions? Why didn't we have a safety car?" Especially given, as a reminder, Brundle was almost seriously injured if not killed after Jos Verstappen's Benetton hit him in the head in Brazil. There's the events of Imola 1994, the injuries to Alesi and Lato, Lamy shoved at Silverstone, Bendlinger being put into a coma at Monaco, and Verstappen's fireball at Hockenheim. After this incident, the FIA saw sense and red flagged the race, and here is where a peculiar rule comes into effect. The race had been stopped and the rain was now beginning to ease, so the FIA decided they would resume the race once the mess at Dunlop had been cleaned up, with the 15 remaining runners, and then carry on until the time limit of 2 hours expired. But because the time limit was going to be hit before the amount of laps remaining could be completed, the race was going to be run to aggregate time. Schumacher's lead over Hill when the race was stopped was 6.8 seconds, so when the race was to end again later on, if Damon was leading the race and wanted to take the win, he had to be 6.9 seconds, nice, ahead of Schumacher at the checkered flag if he was to take the win. And the first ever BTCC season was settled this way. They took two identical cars, the two drivers that had finished equal on points through the season, and then sent them out for two races. They went out, did a race, swapped cars, and raced again. The aggregate of the time between the two cars once they crossed the finish line was taken, and one guy would be the winner. Tommy Sopwith won the first race by 2.2 seconds. The second race was won by Jack Sears by 3.8 seconds. So Jack Sears was the champion by 1.6 seconds, if that makes any sense. It's the same deal here, just with 15 other drivers. 13 other drivers. Maths, Aiden, come on. The restart was behind the safety car. Once deemed safe, the race began again with Schumacher keeping his lead. Hill had to overtake Schumacher and gap him if he stood any chance of taking the title to the final round in Adelaide. But then Schumacher pitted, which explained why he was able to keep ahead in the first part of the race. I'm also assuming Parc Ferme was in effect at the red flag. Schumacher was running a 2-stop, but Hill was doing a 1-stop, and this worked in Williams' favour as Schumacher was released into traffic and then held up in their spray. But when Hill came in for his stop on lap 25, the right rear wheel nut got stuck and they never changed that tyre, so he was sent back out again on 3 fresh wet Goodyears, which they never told him about. But as he was 1-stopping, Schumacher would have better tyres come the end. Schumacher would now have the lead again after Damon's stop, but this would solidify a Japanese Grand Prix if it stayed as it was, because if Schumacher won both parts, he's the winner anyway. When Schumacher pitted for the second time, the gap was 4 seconds or so in his favour. When he rejoined, Damon was 15 seconds or so in front, but Schumacher with fresher tyres was able to close in. Hill was staring at the trackside Jumbotron screens to get any extra information, which piled on the pressure even more. One mistake, and that was it. He described one lap as an out-of-body experience as he drove out of his skin to set a lap fast enough to cancel out Michael's charge, as Michael was lapping about a second faster than the Williams every single time on those fresh tyres. In the end, Damon crossed the line first, and the aggregate timing score, if you want to call it that, came to a total of 3.3 seconds. It's probably Damon's finest drive, along with the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix and the 1997 Hungarian Grand Prix, and given the absolute state of the 1994 season, it was the only time he beat Schumacher on merit all year, as the points were overhauled due to disqualifications and bans more than anything else, and Schumacher suffering gearbox issues at Barcelona. The final results are on your screen. Mansell had beaten Alesi over the line, but the Ferrari was classified ahead due to the aggregate scoring, which also might have put a smile on Damon's face because he destroyed Mansell and won. 13 drivers finished the race, Blundell and Barrichello being the ones to retire in the second phase of the Grand Prix. It also meant that Damon was now only 1 point behind Michael heading to the season finale in Adelaide. It was one of the brief flashes of when Damon could channel his father, when he could be a world-class driver on his day. But as anyone will tell you, a world-class driver on your day does not make you world-class. But at the same time, this race was a warning that was never heeded. As I've already mentioned, the FIA had 2 advance warnings to the 2014 Japanese Grand Prix. This race, where basically the exact same incident happened, only that Brundle missed the recovery vehicle and hit the wall instead, and another human being, and the 2007 European Grand Prix. This race is, well, it's when Brundle predicted Bianchi, which might actually be the title for this video. So then, a look at Damon's best drive, now overshadowed by the foreshadowing of the incident at Dunlop Corner. If this video has taught you something new, then do like the video, and for more stuff from this channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on for any future videos. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the support, and if you want to help out at a more personal level, the links to Patreon as well as socials and Discord are down in the description. Or the super thanks if you just want to do a one-off tip. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.